Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back. Now today's video is a little different as I normally review and rank films on this channel. Today I'm going to be doing my very first top 10 video. I'll be doing my top 10 personal favorite vampire films. I got the idea to make this video from Garrett from the YouTube channel Born to Be Rad, which by the way guys, definitely go check him out. I recently discovered and subscribed to his channel recently. He's got a lot of great content. I'm going to post a link in the description where you can go check him out. Guys, definitely do, and be sure to subscribe to his channel. He's got a lot of great stuff over there. But he recently posted his video of his top 10 vampire films, and then he sent out a post challenging other YouTube channels to make a video of their list of top vampire films. And so here I am today accepting that challenge. And let me tell you, it was definitely a challenge. While I do enjoy vampire films, I'm more personally a fan of werewolf films. I've definitely seen more werewolf films than vampire films. So I really had to go back and check all of the vampire films that I have seen and really get my list narrowed down. Now I'm doing my list a little different. Since most of the vampire films that I've seen are Dracula films, I'm going to be doing my top 5 vampire films and my top 5 Dracula films. Now, before I get started, guys, I just want to let you know that this is just my personal favorite vampire films. Some of your favorites may or may not be on my list. If it's not, I'm not saying that my list is better than yours or my films are better than yours. They're just not my favorite for one reason or the other. And one more thing, guys, before I get started, just letting you know that this is not a ranking. These films are not listed in any particular order. This is just the list that I have. But with that said, let's get started with my top 5 Dracula films. Starting off my list, we have Mel Brooks' comedic take on the infamous vampire story, Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Now guys, growing up for me, this movie was on repeat. I absolutely love this film. To this day, I'm still laughing at all of the jokes or all of the over-the-top scenes. It's just hilarious. I love that it parodies some of the other Dracula films, and while Leslie Nielsen's performance as Dracula was humorous, I have to say that the character Renfield really stole the show for this film. It's just, he always made me laugh, especially the beginning where he first meets Dracula and he tries to walk through the spider web because he sees Dracula do it and he just gets completely tangled up in it. It still makes me laugh to this day. I recently introduced this film to my wife and she loved it, and it's one of the films that we tend to watch almost every Halloween. Coming up next on my list is Dracula 2000, starring Gerard Butler. Guys, I remember when I first saw this film all the way back in 2000. I remember seeing the VHS on the shelves at Blockbuster, and at the time I was a huge Dracula fan and I really wanted to watch this movie, but the only way that my mom would let me rent it is if my dad watched it with me, and he did, and I got to watch it. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I love that we see Dracula in a more modern day setting as he's terrorizing New Orleans during Mardi Gras. And one of the things that I love most about this film is that its unique take on Dracula's origin. Now, Dracula's origin is most of the time tied to Vlad the Impaler, but not in this case. In this case, Dracula, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, is actually Judas Iscariot, who was cursed with vampirism and immortality after he betrayed Christ. And I just love that twist. I kind of feel like it adds a little bit more depth to him as it explains how Dracula is immortal, how it's almost impossible to kill him. And I just love the movie. It's definitely one of the more unique Dracula films out there and definitely deserves to be on my list. Coming up next was a little difficult because it wouldn't be a good Dracula list if I didn't include one of the Universal Studios' take on Dracula, but I couldn't decide which one that I wanted to feature, either the original from the 1930s starring Bela Lugosi or the one from the 1970s starring Frank Langella. So I just decided, you know what? This segment's going to be a tie because both of the films are great in their own way. The original is iconic, especially for Bela Lugosi's performance, and I love the fact that it's except for a couple of moments in the film, has no music. I don't know, for me, that just grounds it in a way and makes it a little bit more frightening, as with no music, it makes me feel like I'm watching these events like recorded in real life or something. But the performances are great. To this day, it's definitely one of the best Dracula films out there, and every Dracula fan definitely needs to see the original 1930s one. And while I'm at it, the 1970s one, starring Frank Langella, was great too. It's more of a dark romantic take on Dracula, but even though it's more of a romance film, it's definitely scary. It's got some chilling images. I think the cinematography was great. I love the effects. The acting is very well done. And one of my favorite things about it is John Williams' iconic score. It's a very haunting but repetitive melody, and it's just, I couldn't hear this score in any other film except Dracula. Coming up next is Francis Ford Coppola's film Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins. Gary Oldman is one of my favorite actors, and I have to say, after recently rewatching it, while his performance is a little over the top, for the version of Dracula that they were wanting to portray, he really nailed it. And again, I just love the cinematography. Danny Elfman's score was great. This film definitely makes you sympathize more with Dracula. I love the effects and the costume designs. I love that we see him turn into a monstrous werewolf-like creature and then a giant monstrous bat creature. It was just, the designs of those suits were just amazing. And while there are some deviations, I do like that for the most part, it's very faithful to the original novel by Bram Stoker. Coming up next on this list is one of Universal Studios' more recent Dracula films, and that is The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Now, this whole story is based off one of the chapters from Bram Stoker's novel where Dracula is aboard the ship known as the Demeter, and he is terrorizing and massacring the crew aboard the ship. Now, this is not your typical Dracula film, as this is not your typical representation of Dracula, as you mostly see Dracula in, a very sophisticated setting where he's wearing a tuxedo, he's got a big cape, he goes by Count Dracula. Nope, this Dracula is mostly in demon form throughout the whole film, and he's very decrepit, and he's feeding on the crew as he's trying to build up his strength. And throughout most of it, he's a demonic bat-like creature, and he doesn't say very much. He says a few things every now and then, but I kind of think that kind of added to something. It showed Dracula as more of a demonic force to be reckoned with, rather than, a suave, sophisticated vampire count. Alright guys, for my next set of films on my list, it's now time to move away from Dracula films. Coming up next on my list is The Lost Boys. Now, being completely honest, I actually didn't grow up watching this film. I didn't see it until I was already an adult, but I still loved it. I really enjoyed the performances. I liked how all the vampires are this group of rebellious teenagers and how they're terrorizing this one town. And I love that the heroes of the story are the main character's little brother and these kids that hang around a comic book shop. I loved how those two guys at a comic book shop were like the vampire experts of the whole town. And I will say this, that the film does a pretty good job at keeping you guessing. As most of you know who have seen this film, there's this big mystery surrounding who is the head vampire, as one of the main characters is infected with vampirism, and the best way to cure them is to take out the head vampire. And the film does a good job at keeping you guessing as to who that is. They kind of allude to who it may be, but then it throws a curveball, and when you start to suspect it's somebody else, it throws another curveball. So I thought the film did a really good job explaining all of those twists. Coming up next is a more recent vampire film, and that is Abigail. The main vampire is this young ballerina girl, and I gotta say, she is ruthless. She is kidnapped by these group of criminals while she's being held hostage and for ransom, as her father is a mysterious, wealthy crime lord. And throughout the events of this film, I was on the edge of my seat because this girl just tears all of these criminals apart. She is very creepy. She is very brutal. The violence in this scene was dialed to 11 as we see her like dancing with headless bodies, or people being blown to bits. The vampire that creates another vampire is able to control another vampire that they created, and we kind of see that in the film as the young girl Abigail controls one of the criminals that she infected, like she's a marionette on a string or something. It's a great film. I had a blast. This is one that if you have not seen recently, you definitely need to check out. Okay guys, we're almost done, but moving on, next is the film Life Force. Now, I really enjoyed this film. It's not the best vampire film out there, but I definitely think it's really unique, as these vampires originate from space. And while, yes, they can turn into demonic bat-like creatures, they're not your typical vampires. They don't drain your blood from your neck. They actually absorb your life force, leaving you in a very decrepit-like state. The cinematography was great. I just loved all the special effects and practical effects, especially for some of the victims of the vampires who are drained and, again, left in a very decrepit state. I don't know, it's just when they revive themselves, they give me the vibe that I'm watching Return of the Living Dead, especially the scene where the characters in that film are interrogating a zombie woman. I just love this film. It's a unique story, and I had to include it in this list. Coming up next is the film Daybreakers. Now, I've heard some pretty mixed reviews about this film, but I'm going to be completely honest. I really enjoy it. I think it's underrated. I love the concept that we are living in a world that is overrun with vampires. Humans are either on the run for their lives, or they are captured, imprisoned, and they are farmed for their blood. And on that note, the film goes into detail as to what happens to vampires when they don't consume enough human blood. Their body starts to transform into a more demonic looking vampire or feral looking vampire. We have a vampire scientist who discovers a cure for vampirism. I thought the explanation of that was a little convoluted, but interesting nonetheless. But I really enjoyed this film, and this is a film that I would definitely rewatch. All right, guys, now last but certainly not least on this list is Fright Night. I absolutely love this film. I love the story. I love all of the effects, especially at the end where they are fighting the vampire. I love the design of the demonic bat that he transforms into, and especially, again, spoilers, near the end when the vampire is killed, just how his body is decaying and everything. I just love all of those effects. I also love Chris Sarandon's performance. He definitely gives off a charming but sinister vampire, and it's just a great film. Yes, I did check out the remake starring Colin Farrell, but while it was okay for the most part, it definitely doesn't compare to the original. And the novelization to the film was great as well. I even reviewed that on my Paper Movies channel when Encyclopocalypse released the audiobook for it. Guys, Fright Night is definitely one of the best vampire films and best vampire stories out there. If you have not seen it, definitely check that one out. And there you have it, guys. That is my top 10 personal favorite vampire films. Now, yes, again, there are quite a bit of vampire films out there that were not featured on this list. And again, definitely not saying that they're bad films. It's just for one reason or the other, they're just not my favorite. But I definitely would like to know what your favorite vampire films are, so be sure to leave your list down in the comments below. But guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, be sure to hit that like button. And if you're new to my channel and enjoying my videos, then be sure to consider to hit that subscribe button. But guys, thank you all so much again. I'll see you next time.